Hey guys, what's up? Just thought I'd come on here and talk about a little something. Now, earlier today, I did a Princess Sally retrospective, kind of in response to Crystal Maiden 77's review of 134 that she did not that long ago. But I'm also wanted to come on here now. But basically, what I'm saying is I wanted to come on here and talk about something as well because, well, I was, looking up stuff to, pictures and all that to add to the video to kind of match with what I was talking about. I went to several wiki sites, or fan-related wiki sites, fandom sites, if you will, of the Archie comics version of Sonic the Hedgehog, and I got and the information I was able to get from there helped out as well as some of the images. But I also saw something as well. Now, as you know, in any of these Wikipedia fan sites or whatever, or even Wikipedia in general, they have these links that you can click on to go to the information that they are using as a source to add to the Wikipedia page or the Wikipedia page, fandom page that they're creating or that people are helping to create. Well, on basically the Archie Sonic one, I believe, yeah, the Archie Sonic one, they had two links to pages that had information that by now I'm pretty sure a lot of people know about, but may not know too much about. And that information is on abandoned and unused concepts. And we're not just talking the abandoned and unused concepts that Ian Flynn had originally planned, but we're talking abandoned and unused concepts when it came to Ken Penders, Karl Bollars, and others. So I want to take this time to kind of discuss that and maybe get your guys' opinion on it. Okay, so the first one I want to talk about, I'm just drinking some Pepsi there to keep me going with this. But the first one I want to talk about here, um, and just untangling a little bit of the wire on my mic. But the first one I want to talk about is basically the abandoned and unused concepts by Karl Bollars, Ken Penders, and some other people. So let's look into that, shall we? All right. So the first thing I want to look into or discuss is what it says here on the Mobius Encyclopedia fandom page. Basically, hold on for a sec, just taking care of something. But like I said, here's what it says on the Mobius Encyclopedia page, and I'll try to provide the links when I'm said and done, so you guys can read it yourselves. But here's what it says on the Mobius Encyclopedia page at archiesonic.fandom.com, and that being the wiki page for it, of abandoned and unused concepts. Here's what they say. Here's basically how the article goes. It states, and I quote, when planning a story, whether it be in movies, television, or books, many ideas are considered for how to progress with the narrative. Ultimately, not all ideas make it into the final product for various reasons. Over the years, the Archie Sonic the Hedgehog publications have had many unused ideas and concepts. Reasons can range from the creativities deciding that something doesn't work, plans changing, or, and they put this in parentheses, in the majority of cases, the idea is not approved by Sega. So that's the opening on the Ken Penders, Karl Bollars, and other previous writers before Ian Flynn article of abandoned and unused concepts. Continuing on, we get to the first section, which is the unused and altered villains. The unused and altered villains section. Here it states, and I quote, One of the earliest story ideas pitched by Ken Penders involved two villains who were essentially parodies of the Super Mario Brothers, in reference to Sega and Nintendo's fierce rivalry in the 90s. They do have some early drawings. We'll look into those in a moment. They say that this idea was rejected by Sega for being too oblivious or being too obvious. However, this did not stop Fleetway from introducing their own take on the idea in the Moxo Brothers. So basically, Fleetway, which was the UK publisher of their own version of Sonic the Hedgehog comic, decided to go with it instead of Archie being allowed to do it. They also mentioned in these unused and altered villains section, um, early idea. They also mentioned some early ideas for Sonic, for evil Sonic, Sonic's counterpart. They state, and I quote, early ideas for evil Sonic were plentiful. One concept involved Sonic's anti-Mobius counterpart being Dr. Sonic, a version of Sonic who, judging by the name, would have been in Dr. Robotnik's role. So yeah, they were going to make the original idea for evil Sonic, who went on to be Scourge in the comics, was that he was going to be a Sonic version of Robotnik, which is really interesting. So far, what we get when it comes to some unused ideas and altered ideas is at one point Ken Penders wanted to introduce parody villain or villainous parody versions of Mario and Luigi, but Sega shot that down, and instead Fleetway Comics in the UK, who distributes their own Sonic the Hedgehog comic, was able to get away with it with their introduction of the Moxo brothers. Now, along with that, we also get information that Evil Sonic was supposed to actually be a Sonic version of Robotnik. So that's kind of interesting. That was one of the sorry about that, but that was one of the original ideas to begin with. All right, the next article talks about, on the next section, talks about the Princess Sally miniseries. It says here in the section on the Princess Sally miniseries of the abandoned and unused concepts for it, it states Ken Penders and Michael Gallagher had originally pitched two alternate storylines for the comic's first three-issue miniseries starring Princess Sally. The first pitch revolved around an alternate origin for Alicia Acorn. Sally would discover that her mother was roboticized and currently leading an underground civilization. Okay, let me reread that. It states, and I quote, and this is based on the abandoned and unused concepts when Ken Penders, Mike Gallagher, and Karl Bollars and others were on board before Ian Flynn. It states that, and this is the Princess Sally miniseries section of the abandoned and unused concepts, that Ken Penders and Michael Gallagher had originally pitched two alternate storylines for the comic's first three-issue miniseries starring Princess Sally. The first pitch revolved around an alternate origin for Alicia Acorn, Sally's mother. Sally would discover that her mother was roboticized and was currently leading an underground civilization. Had the plot come to fruition, the Robian Alicia would have gone on to become a reoccurring threat for both the Knothole Freedom Fighters and Dr. Robotnik. So what we're getting there, so basically the first idea that they came, so basically what I'm understanding there is Alicia would have been basically kind of basically it says it right there. She would have been an underground leader. She would have been a DTA kind of character, not trusting anybody, not making allies with anybody, and just looking out for those that she is leading. Okay, so that's the idea I'm getting. Now the second pitch for a different kind of storyline when it came to Sally's miniseries involved Sally and Bunny Rabbit, doing a Thelma and Louise and and heading off on a road trip to stop a threat that had come about on the other side of Mobius. Let me reread that. The second pitch for a different kind of storyline when it came to Sally's miniseries was Sally and Bunny doing a Thelma and Louise and heading off on a road trip to stop a threat that had come about on the other side of Mobius. So instead of getting the so basically instead of the story that we got, um, with Sally and with Sally training this new group of freedom fighters and fighters and stuff. Hold on for a sec. Sorry for that abrupt interruption, guys. But anyway, yeah, let me reread what I last read before I took that break. It's on the section for the Princess Sally miniseries, the three-part miniseries that she did. There were two alternate storylines that were pitched to be like the center for, or be the focal point of the three issue miniseries. The first storyline pitched by Ken Penders and Mike Gallagher was for Sally, and sorry, my finger at the mic there. But the first storyline pitch for the Sally miniseries, before we eventually got what we did, revolved around an alternate origin for Alicia Acorn, Sally's mom. Basically, the story would have called for Sally to discover that her mom was roboticized and was currently leading in an underground civilization. Had the plot come to fruition, the Robian Alicia, roboticized Alicia, would have gone on to become a reoccurring threat to both the freedom fighters and Dr. Robotnik. In other words, what I'm getting from there is she would basically be non-trusting of anybody. She would basically be looking out for herself and those that she is leading and protecting. Basically, in other words, she would just be on an island onto her own. Now, the second storyline pitched for the Sally miniseries, according to Kim Penders and Mike Gallagher, from what they had noted, is it would have involved Sally and Bunny Rabbit, doing a Thelma and Louise and heading off on a road trip to stop a threat that had come about on the other side of Mobius. So yeah, those were the two. So yeah, basically the second idea was for Bunny and Sally to go on a global road trip like Sonic and Tails had, or were going to beforehand, like Sonic and Tails were going to do with World Tour, to stop a threat that had come about on the other side of the planet. So, according to what I'm getting here, the world tour that we got for Sonic and Tails that went for several issues. Went for several. Well, I wouldn't say several. Almost went for about a year's worth of issues. What it sounds like is Sally and Bunny originally were going to beat them to the punch when it came to that. So that basically was something that was planned out, but unfortunately never came to be, due to the fact that, as it said, as I mentioned, as I read off at the beginning, these were ideas that were pitched, but they never came to a realization at all. All right, the third section is one of the bigger ones. It deals with Endgame, the four-part miniseries from issue 47 to issue 50. And this is what it says, and I quote. This is from the Endgame saga. This is from the section on the four-part miniseries Endgame. This is what it says on the archiesonic.fandom.com wiki page of Abandoned and Unused Concepts. And I quote. This is what it says in the Endgame section. One of the most famous instances of story plans being drastically changed was the Endgame story arc, Sonic the Hedgehog issues 47 to 50. At the time, it was believed Endgame would have been the comic's finale, with the arc being written to bring to an end the battle against Robotnik. Infamously, Infamously, Sally was originally intended to die after her fall in issue 47, with Ken Penders explaining that Sally was a redundant character now that her father was back on the scene. When the series ended up continuing, Ken intended for Sally to be replaced by a robot doppelganger. Sally's death was quickly reversed at Sega's request, as the company apparently had marketing plans for the character. Had the plot involving the robot double gone forward, it would have been the focus of many issues to come. The cancellation instead brought about the World Tour storyline. So, in other words, basically, as I've mentioned before, and others have probably pointed out, Sega Sega basically said no to Ken Penders wanting to keep Sally dead because, as I just read there, the reasoning originally was Ken Penders, along with others, thought 50 issues would have been the limit for the comic because not many comics adapting or based off other franchises, other medias like video games and cartoons last any longer than up to maybe 50, 60 issues. So Ken Penders obviously was surprised that the series was going to continue. But even with that knowledge, he still intended for Sally to die and go forward with the robot doppelganger story arc. But Sega said, no, you're not going to do that because we have plans for Sally and none of them involve her being dead and being replaced by a robot doppelganger. And from what I've been able to back this up with, in my opinion, was when this story arc came about, it was around 1997, and that was the time that the Sega World theme parks, indoor theme parks, had become a thing, and one of the more popular and prominent ones was the Sega World in Sydney, Australia, which featured the Sonic Live in Sydney stage show that, ironically, had Sally as one of the main characters. Long story short, the stage show was a show that had actors in costumes acting out a story, kind of a musical story, on stage, and then the actors in costumes were replaced by puppets. So, yeah, basically that to me is what I feel was Sega's reasoning because of the fact that she was playing a major part in the Sonic Live in Sydney, Australia, or the Sonic Live in Sydney stage show in the Sega World at Sydney, Australia. Now, continuing on, the the section based on the section dedicated to Endgame, finishes off by saying, back when Endgame was planned. This is the last paragraph in the section dedicated to the Endgame saga. It says, and I quote, back when Endgame was planned as the final arc of the comic, the 50th and final issue would have been an extended issue featuring more story content. It later had to be reduced to a normal-sized issue, resulting in many scenes being cut out. The original extended cut of issue 50 was later released in Sonic Super Special number 6, which I do have, and basically it does show a little bit more content of what was going on. Alright, the next section deals with the Knuckles comic Consolation and Sonic Adventure. Now, in case you guys don't know, Knuckles had a spin-off comic thanks to the Sonic comic. Knuckles basically had a miniseries like Sally and Tails before him. So it was only, and he had several 4-part miniseries as well before he inevitably got his own book. Now, unfortunately, the book did not last very long. I think it lasted to about maybe 40 issues. Like I said, it lasted to about 40 issues and had to be canceled. Knuckles' stories would still go on as backups in the main Sonic book. But this is what the section based on the Knuckles comic Cancellation and Sonic Adventure adaptation that took place in the book has to say. This is what the section on the Knuckles comic Cancellation and Sonic Adventure had to say, and I quote, Originally, the comic's full-length adaptation of the game Sonic Adventure was slated to run between 4 issues of Archie Sonic the Hedgehog and 2 issues of Archie's Knuckles the Echidna, as well as a super special. Knuckles portion, or the Knuckles portion, would have began in issue 33 of his series. However, the series was canceled after 32 issues. Okay, it was 32, not 40. As a result, the adaptation underwent a reformatting. Okay, let me reread that. Hold on. I know we're at 20 minutes, 34 seconds. Alright, let me reread that again. This is the section talking about the cancellation of Archie's Knuckles the Echidna comic, which was based off of Sonic, and the Sonic Adventure adaptation that they were planning to do. Here's what it says, and I quote. Sorry for a bit of a pause. I was just checking something, but here's what they had to say, and I quote. Originally, the comic's full-length adaptation of the game Sonic Adventure was slated to run between 4 issues of Archie's Sonic the Hedgehog comic and 2 issues of Archie's Knuckles the Echidna comic, as well as a Sonic super special. Knuckles' portion would have began in issue 33 of his series. However, the series was canceled after issue 32. As a result, the adaptation underwent a reformatting. The 2 Knuckles stories were split into 4 backup stories that ran in the back of the main Sonic issues, meaning the main Sonic stories also had to be halved, making it so that the adaptation took up 6 issues rather than 4. Now, continuing on, finishing up this section, the cancellation of the Knuckles series also meant that Knuckles' ongoing storyline had to be continued as backup stories in the main Sonic series. The backups ran semi-regularly from issues 88 to 125. This reformatting reportedly caused many minor script changes. Okay, so basically what we're getting there, what I'm understanding there is when they did the adaptation for the Sonic Adventure video game, that the original plan was it was supposed to run for only run for a minimum of 4 issues in the main comic and one super special issue, as well as run for 2 issues in the Knuckles comic. In other words, what we know as, what I'm trying to say is, what we know of as what. Hold on for a sec. I know we're at 23 minutes 5 seconds, but anyway, what I'm saying is, what I'm getting here is the way it was planned for the adaptation of Sonic Adventure to be released is very similar to what we got later on down the line with the Worlds Unite and Worlds Collide crossover between Sonic and Mega Man, where parts of the story took place in the Sonic comic and other parts took place in the Mega Man comic. So that's basically what it sounds like we would have gotten here originally with the Sonic Adventure adaptation. That basically 4 parts of the story were going to take place in the main Sonic book, 2 parts were going to take place in the spin-off Knuckles book, and I think it was supposed to wrap up in a 48-page Sonic Super Special issue. That's the vibe I'm getting there. Now, is that true? Is that the case? I don't know, but it definitely sounds like it would have made sense because at the time, Sonic Adventure was touted as one of the bigger Sonic games, if not one of the bigger, longer-running video games out there at the time. So it would have made sense for them to probably emphasize that by having it span across several different comics. So unfortunately, what happened is when the Knuckles comic was canceled after 32 issues, they had to take anything that was going to be part of the Knuckles comic originally and basically reformat it to where it was cut down to just 11 pages, and they were put into multiple parts. This would include Knuckles temporarily dying and becoming one with the universe before coming back in 125. All right, next up we have um, Mobius 20 years later. We have Mobius 20 years later. Hold on for a sec. Okay, but anyway, like I was saying, the next section deals with Mobius 20 years later. Now, in case you guys don't know what Mobius 20 years later was, originally it was a story arc or story that was brought up by Ken Penders. Basically, Ken Penders had created this to kind of give us a glimpse into the future. And as I'm about to read here, it may emphasize it here, I'm not sure. But basically, Ken Penders' original idea, original plan for 20 years later was that Mobius 20 years later was going to be the future, was going to be the legit future that was going to take place. And basically, what happened was there was executive meddling, from what I can understand, to where I think it was Archie, I believe, Archie Comics in this case, stepping in. The honcho's there saying, no, you can't do this. Because if he would have gone through with it, basically he was spoiling what was going to be the outcome of the war of between the freedom fighters and Robotnik. So, oh, something like that. That was one of the things I heard. But this is what the section on Mobius 20 years later has to say, and I quote. This is what the section on Mobius 20 years later has to say, and I quote. The story was originally planned to be done in a Sonic Super Special issue. According to Ken Penders, the comic would have been kicked off with Julie Sue being informed of being pregnant. Originally, the main villain for the story would have been Dr. Ian Droid, the main baddie from Sonic Super Special 7, which was a crossover between the Sonic characters and well-renowned characters from Image Comics at that time. And finishing off, it says somewhere along the line, it was just simplified. It was just simplified to be just Eggman. Excuse me. So basically, when Mobius 20 years later was originally pitched by Kim Penders, it would have been somewhat of a sequel to the crossover we got in Sonic Super Special 7. It would have been a continuation of finding out who this villain was in that issue. And finding out that this villain was responsible for what was going on. Because basically what was happening was the world was kind of falling apart. It was breaking up and everything. And it all had to do with a situation, some kind of time anomaly. And basically Sonic had to go back in time to try to fix it, and he just vanished. And that gave us another version of Mobius years later down the line. But basically that's basically, again, like I said, Kim Penders, though, from what he said also, and I'm surprised he didn't mention it here, had gone on record and said that 20 years later, the future story arc, the future storyline that he was doing was going to be the legit future. It was going to be as things were going to happen. But like I said, down the line, somewhere in between that, people, the higher honchos or something, said, no, you can't do that because it's giving away the outcome of the war, and that's going to hurt the comic in the long run. So that pretty much was the ideas to make it a legit future was kind of scrapped, even though Ken Penders still wanted to continue with it, or planned to continue with it. All right, we're at 29 minutes, 25 seconds, and now we get to the last section in the abandoned and unused concepts from the Ken Penders and Karl Bollars and Mike Gallagher and others' point of view, pre-Ian Flynn. And it is the post-tossed in space concepts and abandoned ideas. Now, in case you guys don't know what Tossed in Space is, it is a story arc that takes place after 125. Basically, Sonic, in story, sacrifices himself to save the planet but instead of dying, he's blasted 85, 85 million light years away. Now, fast forward, as he tries to get back, and he gets back, he finds out that instead of what seemingly is just a few weeks to him, turns out to be a whole year passing on his planet. So, yeah, a lot had basically gone down in that time. And again, to Sonic, in story, it was only a few weeks, but a whole year had passed on his planet. So here's some of the ideas that were abandoned and unused, some of the concepts. They got two sections, one for Karl Bollars and one for Ken Penders. Karl's is a lot longer than Ken's, which is a surprise. But let's read off what Karl Bollars had originally planned and wanted to do as far as the post tossed in space scenario goes. It starts off, this section does, starts off by saying, and I quote, Karl Bollars posted a number of plans he had intended to implement in the comics following issue 134 that were ultimately never used, lasting as far as issue 150. So he had some plans, and I'm going to check those out. Hold on for a sec. Okay, I guess we won't check it out because apparently archie.sonic-hq.net is no longer around. But anyway, rereading the beginning here, it says, and I quote, Karl Bollars posted a number of plans he had intended to implement in the comics following issue 134 that were ultimately never used, lasting as far as issue 150. And here we go. Here's some of the ideas that were abandoned and unused when Karl was working on the book Post Tossed in Space. It states, and I quote, the Freedom Fighters would have been converted into a new team comprised of Sonic, Tails, Amy, Bunny, and Fiona. Having separated from Sally due to personal differences, Sonic would seek new potential love interests in the form of his teammates, that being Bunny and Fiona, and Amy. But it wouldn't interfere with their professional relationship. Fiona and Amy would have had a rivalry of sorts over Sonic's affections, which would have culminated in Amy and Sonic having a secret relationship after being stranded at sea together, during which Amy's origins would have been explored in a fuller adaptation of Sonic CD. Tails' feelings towards Fiona would also bring him into conflict with Sonic, but would set them aside to focus on refitting the tornado for space travel so that he can reunite with his parents on Agatamin, or basically on the planet they was stranded on. Rotor would have retired from field duty in order to pursue a role analogous to that played by Q, but of James Bond fame, basically similar to that role. In addition, Adam and Nicole, Adam was basically, I guess, Robotnik's answer to Nicole. Adam and Nicole would have formed a relationship, culminating in Adam rebelling against Eggman and joining the kingdom of Acorn with Eggman's army of shadow bots. So, in other words, to simplify it, the Freedom Fighters would have been basically reformatted. The only core members you would have had left were Sonic, Tails, and Bunny, with Amy and Fiona being joined in or being added in. Sonic, because he had separated from Sally in 134, would seek out potential new love interest in the form of his 3 female teammates, which would have led to Sonic ending up with Amy because of the fact that they would be stranded at sea together, which would have also kind of explains Amy's origins and fully explored them in a fuller adaptation of Sonic CD. Tails' feelings for Fiona would have brought him into conflict with Sonic, as we saw later on during Ian's run, but that he would set them aside to focus on refitting his plane, the Tornado, for space travel so he himself can reunite with his parents. Rhoda would have retired from active field duty and became more of someone of a Oracle Q character. Oracle being Batman, being the former Batgirl, and Q of James Bond fame. In addition, Adam, like I said, was the Eggman Robotnik's answer to Nicole, would have started a relationship with Nicole, and then by doing so, and by having that relationship, would have turned against Eggman, joined the Kingdom of Acorn, and brought the Shadowbots along with him to help protect the Kingdom of Acorn. Uh, so yeah, that's basically what it comes down to. I know that sounds kind of confusing and kind of conflicting, but that's what it came down to. Now, continuing on, and I quote, continuing on with this article, and I quote, Eggman would find himself with multiple rivals beyond Sonic, including Shadow and a mysterious 15-foot tall robot known as Skarkus. Eggman would later kidnap Hope, which was his niece, under the pretense that he is the only correct choice to be her legal guardian, while genuinely using her as bait to lure Shadow the Hedgehog, acting as a mysterious guardian angel for Hope. Out, Skarkus would have eventually been revealed to be Snively in disguise, having formed an alliance with Shadow to try and get revenge on Eggman for leaving him to die during the Zora invasion, which was the alien race in 124 and 125. In addition, Coconuts would find a de-roboticized and amnesic Nate Morgan, having survived the destruction of Robotropolis, turning his still incredible genius into a weapon, rebuilding the original Metal Sonic, as well as a Tails doll, Metal Tails, and Metal Knuckles, and Metal Amy. These four robots would attack New Megalopolis and Knothole City, with everyone believing they've been roboticized. During the conflict, Metal Sonic would gain enough power to morph into Metal Overlord, which sounds like they would have gone into the Sonic Heroes adaptation. So yeah. Basically the vibe I'm getting there is, on that part of the section, is Robotnik, out of desperation, would kidnap Hope, who was a character introduced earlier on, and basically kidnap her with the assumption that he's the more suitable guardian for her, but would only be doing so he could lure Shadow and the Skarkus, who would turn out to be Snively, out into the open to try to get rid of them, maybe bribe them into working with him or something like that. I don't know. But then we have Coconuts, who if you watch the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog show, was more of a comedic character, always like just a pushover. Would have basically found Nate Morgan and manipulated Nate Morgan to do his bidding, and by doing so would have recreated Metal Sonic, as well as recreated the Tails doll, or created the Tails doll, create a Metal Knuckles and a Metal Amy, and thus with these two attacking both New Megalopolis, which was Robotnik City, and Knothole City, that, with everyone believing that these characters had been roboticized, it would be during the conflict that Metal Sonic would get enough power to morph into Metal Overlord from the Sonic Heroes game. Now, moving on to the next part of this section, we talk about Sally, and this is what they talk about Karl Bollars' plans for Sally, and I quote, Sally would have been revealed to be a pawn in the villainous plot by the source of all, having survived the destruction of Robotropolis and reconstituting itself in a remote mountain range, set to prevent the future scene in Sonic in Your Face. To protect it, the children of Uma Oculus, which was a spider villain or bounty hunter, would have been gathered as a group known as the Strand, due to being corrupted by Naugus. Naugus would have possessed King Max through the crown and used him as a puppet in an attempt to gain a physical form, transforming Max's body into a duplicate of his own, only to be thwarted by the destruction of the Crown of Acorns. So, what we're getting here is, in case you guys don't know, one of the subplots for Sally was there was this new royal source of power called the Source of All, where many of her ancestors, including her father, had bonded with it to, or had submerged themselves into the pool. In other words, they stepped into the pool and basically went underwater or went under it. They submerged underneath the pool, or if you will, became one with and became one with it. And Sally is shown a future that basically depicts her and Sonic being married, another war breaking out, stuff like that. So, long story short, the source of all, even after Sally reemerges from the pool and basically says, "Look, I'm not, I don't want to be the kind that knows what's going to happen before it does." So she basically, basically she rejects the pool's offer to, become one with it so she can know what's going to happen before it happens. And she says, "No, that's not how I want to operate, how I want to work." And so she rejects it, but the source of all doesn't take no for an answer. And since the source of all is bounded to a lot of the royal artifacts, the sword, the crown, and all that, it still attempts to woo Sally or convince Sally to bond with it and say, "Look, this is your destiny. You have to go this route. You have to do it." And eventually Sally says no, and she gives the sword to the spider children, to Uma Akaris's children, to guard and keep safekeeping, or to keep as safekeeping, I should say, or whatever. But from what I'm getting here, the source of all, having been destroyed along with Robotropolis, would have survived that destruction and basically reconstituted itself in a remote mountain range with plans to prevent a future seen in Sonic in Your Face. That future being Sally and her friends all living happily, her and Sonic together, and Rotor sending Nicole from the future into the past to be Sally's guardian and all that, to be Sally's interpreter or whatever. So, yeah, that would have happened, and then Naugus coming into play would have once again possessed Sally's father through the crown and used him as a puppet to attempt to gain a physical form. And as he's possessing him, he basically takes over his body. He basically morphs Max's body into a duplicate of his own, but then that gets taken out by the destruction of the Crown of Acorns. So basically, Karl Bollars' plans for Sally was she, I guess with the help of Sonic and all of them, would have basically prevented the source of all from, along with maybe even Naugus's help, from basically trying to destroy them or prevent a certain future from occurring. Now, with that said, now we get into another section, which is about Antoine. Now, in case you guys don't know, Antoine had a bit of a shift in character. Antoine basically had become darker, been more secluded, broke up with Bunny, so a lot was going on, and none of us as readers, and even with the characters, knew what was happening. Mostly Sonic. So, this is what Karl Bollars' original intentions were for Antoine, and I quote, "Antoine's darker demeanor and loss of innocence is revealed to be the result of him succumbing to the source's will. One day marrying Princess Sally without any given reason, which will result in the source bonding with Sally permanently. In hopes of winning Bunny back, Antoine allows himself to be possessed by a corrupted source, turning him into a villain. Bunny's breakup with Antoine would later lead to Bunny's origins being explored and her true name being revealed as Scarlet O'Hare, which may have served as the inspiration for Scarlet Rabbit and Bunny's code name when she was in the Metropolis Egg Army in the Soft Retcon reboot. So what we're getting there, basically, from what I understand, is something that I think a lot of us already knew, but basically, when it was revealed later on that, and I think they do mention this, and I mentioned this in the Sally retrospective, when it was revealed later on that the Antoine that was in Mobius Prime was Antoine's evil doppelganger, Patch from the anti-world, from the anti-Mobius, um, when it was later revealed that that's who Antoine was, the original plan basically was not to be that I should say. Well, I'm trying to find the words I'm trying to say here, but because I'm doing this on the fly. But basically, Antoine's darker demeanor and loss of innocence, as it puts it here, wouldn't have been a result of, oh, he's just evil Antoine from the anti-Mobius. No, it would have been a result of him succumbing to a corrupted source's will. And as it says here, one day marrying Princess Sally without any given reason. Now, the marriage to Sally did kind of take place in line of succession, but not the way Karl Bollars had planned out. Karl Bollars wanted it to be done so that the source of all would bond with Sally permanently. Because you see, the one thing about Sally and the source of all is Sally never wanted to know what was going to happen in the future. She didn't want to know what was going to happen next before it happens. But by this happening, the source would have gotten its opportunity. And it does say here that in hopes of winning Bunny back, Antoine would have allowed himself to be possessed by the corrupted source, turning him into a villain. And that Bunny's breakup with Antoine would later lead to her origins being explored and her true name being revealed as Scarlet O'Hare. So, yeah, a lot of interesting information there. Now we get into, as I check here, we are at 46 minutes, 38 seconds. We get into another unused and abandoned concept and idea by Karl Bollars, and that is Locke and Laura Lee, which were echidnas, of course. But it states here that Locke and Laura Lee, would set aside the previous disputes to help raise kneecaps after his father ends up in the egg grape chamber. Meantime, Knuckles would depart Angel Island after learning that his presence exposes the location of the Master Emerald, going on a global pilgrimage to learn martial arts and battle Monkey Kong while under the control of the Iron Queen before discovering the Master Geo, a powerful gemstone capable of restoring one's life. Mammoth Mogul, beginning to age rapidly due to his original Chaos Emerald running out of energy, forces himself to seek out an alternative source through illicit expeditions. I can't pronounce the word. I couldn't pronounce that. Archaeological expeditions, and hiring mercenaries like Knack the Weasel. The Master Geode would be contested by him, the Iron Queen, Dr. Eggman, and Rouge the Bat. So basically, what we're getting there from the Karl Bollars perspective is the two villains that Knuckles has gone against that are kind of within his family, if you will, or kind of close to his family, would have set aside the villainous ways to raise Kneecaps, who was a baby echidna, because the father ended up in the egg grape chambers. Now, with that said, it does go on to state that Knuckles would have departed Angel Island because of his presence exposing the location of the Master Emerald, would have gone on a world tour of his own to learn martial arts, battle Monkey Kong, who ended up under the control of the Iron Queen again, before discovering the Master Geo, a powerful gemstone capable of restoring one's life. We would have found out that Mammoth Mogul was beginning to age due to his original power source of a Chaos Emerald running out of energy, forcing him to seek out alternative sources through illicit agricultural expeditions and hiring mercenaries like Knack the Weasel, and that the Master Geo itself would have been contested by him, the Iron Queen, Dr. Eggman, and Rouge the Bat. So, very intriguing there. Very intriguing there. Hold on. All right. Finally, as we reach the 50-minute mark, the last of the Karl Bollars section states this: a new dingo regime Hold on. Something just happened here. I don't know what occurred here. That was weird. Okay. Hold on for a sec. Something occurred. I don't know what just happened there. This is what happens when you do things on the fly. But anyway, continuing on. It states, this is the last of the Karl Bollars section. A new dingo regime leader named Colonel Mange would have been introduced with Croctobot, Jackrabbit, and Guile Nye being reintroduced as Eggman's sub-bosses over Down Under. The great over Down Under. Okay, let me reread that because I got a little messed up here due to the sudden change in web page. All right, let me reread this last section on Karl Bollars, and I quote, his unused concepts and all that. And I quote, a new dingo regime leader named Colonel Mage would have been introduced, with Croctobot, Jackrabbit, and Guile Nye being reintroduced as Eggman's sub-bosses over Down Under, the Great Desert, and Albalin. This would have led to the disappearance of the Down Under Freedom Fighters and a confrontation involving the mercenary Freedom Fighters. In the meantime, evil Sonic would come to enjoy impersonating Sonic and enjoy the love of his parents and adulation of his people, leading him to plan to eliminate Sonic and permanently take his place. So the story that we got between 150 and 151 as basically sounds like that was originally planned to be penned and written and released thanks to Karl Bollars. Now, the idea for Karl Bollars to introduce a new dingo regime leader in Colonel Mage is interesting, as well as bringing back characters like Croctobot, Jackrabbit, and Guile Nye to be reintroduced as Eggman's sub-bosses over Down Under certain sections of the planet, like the Down Under, the Great Desert, and Albalin, would have been interesting, especially Jackrabbit, since a lot of people looked at Jackrabbit as basically someone that was not meant to be a freedom fighter, even though he was more suited to be an Eggman sub-boss. So if there was anything Karl Bollars probably would have done correctly and people would have gotten behind, it's that. Now, according to what he says, this would have led to the disappearance of the Down Under Freedom Fighters, which no doubt would have probably brought Tails into play, in a confrontation involving the mercenary Freedom Fighters. And then we get the fact that evil Sonic would have come to enjoy impersonating Sonic and enjoying the love of his parents and the adoration of his people, leading him to plan to eliminate Sonic and permanently take his place. So in other words, what we kind of got a bit of an example of in 150 and 151, Karl Bollars originally wanted to extend into a bigger arc. So there you go. Alright, to finish off this article of the abandoned and unused concepts, when Ken Penders, Karl Bollars, and Mike Gallagher and others were running the show, we finally get to the Pender section, which is a lot shorter, I should say, than Karl Bollars. And this is part of the post-Tossed in Space storylines, or abandoned concepts and all that. This is the Ken Pender section, and this is how short it is. And I quote, when Karl left, this is the beginning of the Ken Pender section and shows you how short it is. And I quote, when Karl left, Ken had a number of plans set up, the biggest of which was that he was going to try to fix the breakup between Sonic and Sally. The Mobius 25 Years Later story, which is a continuation of Mobius 20 Years Later, would have concluded with King Sonic being unable to fix the damage, leading Rotor to send Nicole into the past as pure Sonic in your face. Because, like I said, in the first 48-page special, which was Sonic in Your Face, which kind of helped lead into the Sally miniseries, Rotor of the future sent Nicole into the past because Nicole was from the future to help Sally and Sonic and the other freedom fighters out. Because she had knowledge of what was to be, so that would help give him the advantage. Continuing on, it states, another romantic plot point would have been between Antoine and Bunny, as Antoine would ask Bunny to marry him, but wouldn't get an answer to issue 175. The marriage would have happened around issue 200. So instead of the three-part arc that we got between 198, 199, and 200, which resulted in Eggman cracking at the end and would lead into the Iron Dominion arc, instead we would have gotten this Bunny and Antoine marriage, which would have been built up for 25 issues. But because Ian Flynn took over and Ian Flynn wanted to kind of wipe the slate clean, get a lot of subplots and stuff that were left over kind of taken care of and out of the way, we instead got the marriage around 174. So there you go. And last but not least, it states Sonic would have been shaken up by a number of status quo changes, including the death of Snively and becoming a gentleman at arms for Sally, which makes things awkward for them. So in other words, a gentleman at arms is basically someone that's at your side all the time, is your guardian, protects you, stuff like that. So, and apparently Snively would have died. So yeah, that's basically it for the Ken Pender section, and that's basically it for the abandoned and unused concepts when it comes to the run by Karl Bollars, Ken Penders, Mike Gallagher, and many others before Ian Flynn came on board. So, yeah, that's about it, guys. So, I'm going to end it here, kind of take a bit of a break, but let me know what your thoughts are, and I'll get into the Ian Flynn one probably in a little bit, kind of give myself a bit of a break, but let me know what you guys' thoughts are on all of this. Again, I'll provide a link in the description if I can, and I will talk to you all later. God bless. Take care. And the runtime will be about 57 minutes and about 15 seconds.